Missing someone. Missing someone. Missing someone. Love with all your heart. Missing someone.
Twice before laughing. In 1975, a man in England named Alex Mitchell sat down to watch some TV after a long day of work. He tuned in to watch his favorite comedy show, The Goodies. One of their sketches particularly amused him. He started laughing but found himself unable to quit. He continued laughing for a couple minutes, but when you laugh for 6 minutes, your heart rate begins to increase. 15 minutes passed and Alex continued to laugh hysterically. His heart rate began to increase dramatically, causing him to rapidly lose oxygen and lose control of his sphincter muscles. 20 minutes later, his body was deprived of oxygen and he had a stroke, causing him to die of laughter.
This is why you should always sit in the back seat. Vivian was spending a year in Korea when something terrifying happened. One night she was going out with her two roommates who spoke Korean, and at the end of the night they decided to get a taxi home. Vivian sat in the front and her two roommates sat in the back. This would be her first mistake. The driver spoke really good English and began telling jokes. Vivian found them really funny but soon realized that her roommates weren't laughing. In fact, they had a strange expression on their faces. Vivian said what's wrong, but they wouldn't answer. Suddenly one of her roommates said something to the driver in Korean and he pulled over on the side of the road. Vivian knew something was wrong. They weren't anywhere near their apartment, but her roommates got out of the taxi and started walking away quickly. Vivian paid the driver, then got out to follow them. And that's when she found out the truth. Her roommate said, "Did you hear it? It was coming from the trunk of the taxi. A woman's voice saying, 'Help me, help me.'" What would you do if this happened to you? Once a young woman named Claudia was about to walk home when it started raining heavily. Not wanting to be rained on, she decided she should get a taxi instead. As she walked down the empty streets past the cemetery, a taxi approached her. She got in and quickly realized something was wrong. She began feeling unusually cold and noticed the windows were covered in ice. Then things got even weirder. Claudia realized that they were going the wrong way. She blurted out to the driver, "We're going the wrong way," but got no response. She raised her hand to tap him on the shoulder and the driver looked back. Claudia let out a scream. She couldn't believe what she saw. The driver's face was withered and pale, his skin clinging tightly to his bones. Claudia began to panic. She tried to open the door and jump out, but nothing worked. She even banged on the windows to try to get passers-by's attention, but nobody heard her. Then, in a fit of desperation, Claudia began to scratch at the driver to make him stop driving. His withered face came off into her hand, revealing a gleaming white skull beneath. Claudia and that taxi was never seen again. She could have never guessed what really happened in her basement. Once there was a girl named Brooklyn who moved into an old house with her parents, but there was one door leading to their basement and no one could open it. This made Brooklyn curious, so one day she looked through the keyhole, but she could have never expected what happened next. She saw something moving in the darkness, then quickly coming towards her. As soon as she jumped back, a screwdriver poked through the keyhole. Brooklyn was terrified. She screamed, "Mom, Dad, there's someone in the basement," but no one believed her. Until a few years later, she finally found out the truth, which was even more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. Her family had moved out of the house already, but Brooklyn returned to the area to visit an old friend. She walked by the house and said, "I used to live there." And her friend said, "Yeah, the screwdriver house." Brooklyn instantly had chills. She never told anyone about what happened. She asked, "Why did you just say that?" And that's when her friend told her the story. Shortly after the house was built, a husband, his wife, and their 4 daughters moved in. The wife passed away from a mysterious illness and the husband went insane. He unalived all 4 of his daughters with a screwdriver, then put them all in the basement.
This is why parents should believe their kids. In 2010, a 15-year-old boy started to notice that the door to his attic, which was in his bedroom, was always open. One day, when his mom's giving him a hard time about being lazy, he's like, "Well, you're one to talk. You always leave my attic door open." She's like, "I haven't touched your attic door in months, and nobody else has either." Not easily frightened, the boy decides to leave the attic door open. And so he's laying in bed, and he kind of looks over at the door, and standing in the door frame is a figure staring right at him. He bolts, tells his parents, they don't believe him, and then 6 months later they move anyway. A few years later, the boy discovers his favorite teacher actually moved into his old house. And so he jokingly asks her, "You ever see any ghosts walking around your attic?" Her face got completely serious, and she's like, as soon as we moved in, the door to the attic kept opening. So we investigated and we found a trap door that led onto the roof. Someone had been crawling in through that entrance and living in the attic for years. In 2013, a woman let her dog out to use the bathroom one more time before bed. After only a few minutes, she starts hearing scratching on her door, which is typically the sound her dog makes when he's ready to come in. But it just seemed way too soon for him to be done being outside. So she decides to look through the peephole to make sure it really is her dog. But what she sees is terrifying. A deranged looking man is right outside her door, staring intently at her door handle, waiting for it to turn open. As she's looking in horror, unable to do anything, he starts scratching at the door as hard as he can, never leaving his gaze from the door handle. She manages to stifle a scream, she backs away and realizes her dog is still outside. So she goes to the side window, but there's no sign of her dog, and so she goes back to the door to see if maybe the man's moved. He hasn't moved, his mouth is open, and he's staring directly at the peephole. Then he turns around and walks away. With the man gone, she discovers her dog unharmed, his leash had just been cut. But that means he had a knife. In 1983, a young boy was camping with his family on Roan Mountain in North Carolina when his mom asked him to head on down the path and get some water from the well. When the boy didn't return, his mom went to check on him and he was gone. A massive search party was launched to find him, but with temperatures rapidly dropping and finding no trace of him, the family braced for the worst. Then, miraculously, on the 7th day of the search, the boy shows up on the mountaintop in an area they had already searched, healthy and clean. When they asked the boy, "Where have you been?" he said he had been at the well when a tall, faceless man showed up behind him, scooped him up, and brought him to the top of the mountain where he kept him in his cabin all week. After the boy gave a very detailed description of exactly where this cabin was on the mountain, the police were eager to go find it and confront this guy. But the park superintendent just raised his hand and said, "Guys, it's pointless. I've worked here 40 years. There are no cabins on Roan Mountain."